Hi, I've made a couple of videos recently and I've referred to Michael of Bernicia. I think this guy's fantastic and his family are obviously equally fantastic. They've given him a lot of support, he's given them a lot of support. He's sharing some really vital information for British people according to our culture, our true culture, outside of this imposition of Roman culture that we've been living under for over 1,000 years. Now, a lot of this information, I mean, not anywhere near as detailed as Michael is sharing here, because he's done a lot more research into that than I have. I was on a particular trail of research as related to the gendered constructs and the gender divisions, the Romanic gender constructs that were imposed on us. So my research took me on a different track, and I was at the time, when I came across certain information, I was studying history at Polytechnic, and I did go a lot further than the course of study demanded, but I am very thorough, you know, and like I say, I will follow, once I pick up on a trail, I will follow that information. And it was during my studies and research that I had this experience of witnessing what I describe as universal golden light being intelligence, an event of golden light being intelligence. Again, I'll leave my supernatural and not yet video underneath this, which shares that experience right at the beginning. And as I've explained, you know, there's only two of the supernatural experiences I've had in my life that are shared there, but I've had a lot of supernatural experiences from childhood. But obviously the light being event was the most profound, and I simultaneously received through an energy of bliss at the time of witnessing that event of light being, before, during and after, the message of universal law of abundance and compassion that upholds all our human rights, earth rights, animal rights, that basically upholds the very laws that Michael of Bernicia is explaining are British people's, if not the whole of Europe's, true heritage, and if not the whole of humanity, because we see the similar structures of laws in every land, don't we? Africa had its own constitution for hundreds and hundreds of years before colonisation from a nation like Britain took place. And even the native peoples of Australia and the native peoples of America had their common law. The native peoples of Australia had such a highly civilised, developed concepts of law that they'd managed to abolish war. I mean, imagine that, how amazing that is. That these people who were described by the Western colonisers, that they were savages, had achieved an amazing thing in that they'd been able to abolish war. That with the law, through upholding the law, that basically demanded people show respect to each other, and that's the whole point of the law, is to protect us and to inhibit us from harming life, from harming other people, even perhaps ourselves, and from harming nature. You see, we live in harmony, we live with respect. And if we look at what I call the nature-based faiths that were later judged by Rome as pagan and evil, when you look at the nature-based faith, as, say, for example, the voodoo people of Africa and the druids of Europe, both running on similar lines with slight variations, because you're dealing with people living in different climates and with different resources at their disposal, and culture does very much originate from the lands that we inhabit, in terms of climate, in terms of the resources of those lands. So, as I say, the voodoo and the druids, their nature-based faiths were very similar, ran along very similar lines. And when you look at the way their faith operated, as in terms of the spiritual leaders, so in Voodoo Africa, for example, priestesses were very common among the priests, as it were. I mean, I'm calling them priests. It isn't what they would have been called in their day. They were considered like, you know, holy people, the holy person. But in modern day language, okay, priests and priestesses. And they had a tradition, and the Druids as well had a tradition, that they would notice among the children certain children who displayed certain attributes. So myself as a child, with my profound experiences, which I would not have been inhibited from speaking about, you see, I would have been recognised as a child with certain abilities. So then I would have been taken out of the community in that sense. Of, you know, I wouldn't be training to be working in the fields or what have you. I would be learning the ways of keeping the faith, the knowledge of the faith, because we understood that we are all equal according to the law, but we all have different functions and abilities to give to the society, the community that we're born into, and that it is one of our prime duties, is to recognise the talents and abilities of the upcoming generation, the children, and to make sure that each child fulfills their natural vocation in life, you see. So some people have a vocation to be a mathematician, say, or a vocation to be a surgeon, or a vocation to be a nurse, or a vocation to be a farmer, or a vocation to just be a family man and do a job of work. We all have our levels of existence that we're most comfortable with, and that's where the law assists, because the law provides equality, in the sense that everybody is equal in the eyes of the law. Nobody is too big to stand under the law, and nobody is too small to be protected by that law. The law serves everybody from the first to the last. Under a fair system of law, the lions of humanity will lie down with the lamb of humanity. The meek shall not fear the big and strong, you see, because the law that we are living by right now it isn't a law, it's a criminal rule, it's a tyrannical rule. Okay, so you're talking about a set of rules that facilitate crime and protect criminals. That's what it's there for. And they will always live above it. These rules do not apply to them. These rules apply only to the common mass, whom I'll leave the link to my latest video, which, again, huge thanks to Adam Green of No More News. Please do check out his channel. That they're now establishing this new faith, the Zionists, called the Noahide Project, and us commoners, non-Jews, will all be subjugated to it, and no doubt the true Jews who oppose Zionism, because they understand it is a usurpation of their faith and it is actually oppressing true Judaism. So all of us are going to be Noahides, and we're going to be following these Noahide laws, because we're not actually full human beings. We're a subspecies of human born to be slaves. We are actually cattle and may be killed, or they can do whatever they like to us at any time, because we don't actually have any rights, because we're not human beings, and therefore we don't have any benefits from God's law, you see. So, I mean, all of this madness, that's where we're at today. But it does have its origins from the very fact that we were robbed of our history. We were robbed of the truth of our cultural heritage. We were robbed of the truth of ourselves. Our true humanity was denied and oppressed and subjugated to this Roman rule of consciousness, which I call the wolf pack. And because Rome was established, according to history, you know, well, to legend, by two brothers who were raised by wolves, and they established Rome, and they lived by the order of the wolf pack, and they imposed that on humanity. And as I've repeatedly explained, look, a wolf is very fine for being a wolf, but what's the point of a man being a wolf? He might as well just be a wolf, you see. There's no point. We are not wolves, and we were not created to live by the order of a wolf pack. But nonetheless, that is what was imposed on Rome, and those two brothers followed that even to the death, because ultimately, when it comes to fighting for alpha position, brother will fight against brother, and brother will kill brother, so just one of them can then be the alpha male. And that is the whole point. And in a wolf pack, the pups and the females are completely subjugated. They have no power really whatsoever, though the alpha female may have a little bit more power, so there's a lot of vying among the females to get in with the top dog, as it were, or the top dogs. So, but you see, we aren't meant to live by that. And ultimately, it, you know, by the time it gets filtered through Judaic faith, it becomes Luciferian law, which is might equals right to do as thy will, which I call rapist's law, because it is an assertion over of a male as bigger and stronger than a female to say, well, I can do what I like to you. You have no say, you have no choice, because I'm bigger and stronger, and you must subjugate to my will, which is what was done to women. And that was my inroad into discovering and touching on some of the history that Michael of Bernicia has so eloquently shared here. And as I say, you need to check it out. Okay, so one of the reasons why the Druids and the Voodoo African people incorporated Jesus into their faith, accepted Jesus as a human that had communed and had a connection with divine guidance, is because they recognised that same human being. That is exactly what they aspired to. That is exactly what they understood of humanity. This idea of reincarnation, life after life, eternal light being, and it's noticeable that the people did not create a new faith around Jesus. They didn't, you know, the African people didn't abandon their voodoo faith and all become Christians. The Druid people didn't abandon their Druid faith and all become Christians. What they did was they incorporated the life and teachings of Jesus, updated it into their original faith, you see. So we became Celtic Christians. By that time, we'd already suffered, what, 500, nearly 1,000 years subjugation to Rome, and then suddenly, while Rome was collapsing, we incorporate Jesus and we become Celtic Christians, you see, in the sense that what Jesus did, and this is a very important point, and this is where I hope to be able to add some mortar to the bricks that Michael of Bernicia is sharing here, to add to this, to strengthen what he's explaining, you see, so that people get a real grasp of what really happened. And because in understanding what happened in the past, we more fully recognise exactly the problems of today. And as I've repeatedly explained, if you don't understand the problem, there's no way you're going to ever fix it. And in trying, you're very likely to cause even more damage. So it is very important that people understand the facts, okay? The facts. So, getting back to why the voodoo people and the druid people incorporated Jesus into their faith. You see, because Africa had also been heavily subjugated by Rome, as had Britain. And it was because Africa, in particular, rose up very strongly in, in defence of their own rights all of a sudden, on assimilating Jesus into their faith, that suddenly they were empowered to question Roman rule. Because prior to that, people of Britain and the people of Africa, impressed by the technology of Rome, thinking that yes, these people really are intelligent, are from God, because look at their amazing chariots, look at their amazing equipment, and how well trained they are, and how well ordered they are. You know, they are a superior people. They are a superior intelligence because they're so powerful and strong, you see, that people had subjugated to them, either through force, but also even through their own judgment of themselves, that by comparison we are inferior, you see. And yes, perhaps they're right, this gold does mean that they are more powerful, because that was the foundation of the Roman power structure, was that of Roman faith was around gold, that, you know, people, that's where the first concept of money came from, these golden coins that were created, temple coins, and people had to buy these golden coins in order to be able to pray to God and therefore get blessings from God. So gold was directly connected to a concept of divine higher intelligence, and so very soon these coins took on a value of their own, and the more gold you had, the more of a connection to divine intelligence you had, you see. These are the origins. It's very important that people understand the origins of what where we're at today, and why to this very day gold, which is largely a useless metal, remains so valuable, and to the extent that, you know, children will be murdered for the sake of it. And so it was by connecting with Jesus, and Jesus, who was killed by Rome, who had stood out, spoken out against the Roman occupation of his own lands and the Roman infiltration of Roman practices into Judaic faith, like, for example, people having to buy temple coins in order to go and pray to God. You know, that, I mean, that was why Jesus whipped them out of the temple, because this was a Roman imposition, you see. And so we look at Christianity today from our perspective, our knowledge. We need to understand the people of those times who were under Roman rule, who were thoroughly persuaded to believe that these Romans were divine, had this divine connection, and suddenly they come across Jesus, who's telling them that no, these people, these gold worshippers, they're not connected to divine intelligence. I'm here to share intelligence, you see. And so people recognise that what Jesus was standing up for was exactly what the Judaic people had lived with before, in the same way that the Voodoos and the Druids do, a fairly equal society with a set of laws, that we don't harm each other, and we respect each other, and we don't infringe on each other's rights, and that we live happily and peacefully together, that we harmonise together. I mean, in that sense, life is never going to be completely peaceful, is it? Okay. Because life is full of problems, and that's the whole point, is that we learn to deal with these problems successfully so we can spend more time at peace. We can enjoy more peace in amongst the general tribulations and traumas of life. And there's always going to be problems within a dynamic universe, but that's survival. And life is worth living because the moments of serenity and harmony we experience, and the joy of giving and receiving, are amazing and are so beautiful and wonderful, that yes, a woman will go through the pain of 56 fractures in order to bring a child into life, because it's worth it. Life is worth that amount of pain. The joy of it, the participating of it, the giving and the receiving of it, the sharing, the, the, the chance to experience this universe, you see. And so people connected, the voodoo people understood Jesus was supporting their faith. So the voodoo people, more or less, because they'd had Roman faith imposed upon them, they went back to their voodoo roots, you see. That's what Jesus did. He explained to them, no, you people were living right before. You were living according to a law. What the way you were living was right. There was equality between you male and female, because that's one of the things that the Roman wolf pack, like I say, imposed these divisions, that a male has a heart of stone. Compassion, kindness, mercy, all of these things, they're the burden of the female. They're a sign of weakness. She can be compassionate. That's why she can't have any rights. That's why she can't. She's got to basically be chattel to the male, because she has compassion. Because she will show mercy. She will show kindness. No, no, no. She needs to be totally subjugated. And obviously that had been imposed on British people. It had been imposed on the people of Africa, and they rose up, you know, and they fought against Rome. And it's because Rome was so busy dealing with this rise of Christianity, of Jesus, that was empowering human beings now to say to them, no, you're not a slave. No, their gold is not God. God is intelligence. God is the law. God is your human rights. These are the things that God has given you. You have to stand, you need to stand up for those. And people did. And people weren't afraid to die all of a sudden, because they'd already carried this fundamental belief of our knowledge of our eternal soul, intuitive knowledge that we've known forever, that yes, we do, you know, one day we're here, one day we're not, then we're back again, then we're not, you know, and there are now, by today's knowledge of quantum physics, multi-dimensions of universal truth, as it were, universal life, in the sense of quantum energy is magic, and that's the fact of it. You see, it is magic. It did write our DNA, because we certainly didn't write it ourselves, and none of these people in power wrote our DNA. But that already they feel they have a right to mess about with it. You know, we're dealing with a very dangerous consciousness that has empowered itself on crime, and that's why we can't trust it, you see, because it's rooted in crime. So we cannot trust its alleged progress, because it isn't really progress. It's only progress in as much as it wants to serve its own wolf pack agendas, which itself is a corruption. So so that was how Rome eventually fell, because people had lost faith in their gold. They suddenly had faith in their eternal soul. no amount of briberies or blackmail could stop. No. Yes, you're right. I was a bad person in the past, but I've been baptized now. I've been forgiven. I'm cleansed of sin. And no, I am not going to kill for you. I am not going to steal for you. Your gold is not going to tempt me at all. I am not tempted by it. It's all a lie. I'm serving golden light intelligence. I've gone back to my roots. So, the Druid people, by the time Rome had left, and even the Roman occupiers, a lot of them that stayed, adopted that as well, because, we're all human beings. And everybody settled down to what became Celtic Christianity, which, unlike the Roman established Christianity, which was a death culture, a death-based faith. You see, their cross, a man, is an instrument of torture that crucifies humanity, because that's their law, which is rapist law, Luciferian law. Might equals right to do as thy will. Okay? Whereas the Celtic Christians, our cross was the Celtic cross, which symbolises the 4 equinoxes of summer solstice, the autumn equinox, the winter solstice, and the spring equinox, and the circle of time. And Jesus was understood, like all of humanity, is that we are born on that cross. We are born and we live and we die on that cross of life, which is the 4 equinoxes. Without those equinoxes, really, there would be no life on earth, you see. It is because Earth has its wobble. We understand all this scientifically now, in hard written fact, as it were. But the Druids understood it for centuries. These are the kind of things that they would be passing on by word of mouth to the next generation. The same with the voodoo people. They didn't really need books, because it was passed on through the living consciousness, the book of life, you see. We learn from the book of life. And so people didn't actually rely on words, on the written word. It was the spoken word, the living word, you see, that was important. And by 665, Britain had settled down into its Celtic Christian culture. We had our Celtic Christian churches that incorporated things like the Green Man. It had a lot of the nature-based faith celebrations. Still, we celebrated the winter solstice, the summer solstice, the equinoxes, May Day. We still had our same culture. Women, once again, were free to marry and divorce as they chose. They were free to own property. They were free to go and be a warrior if they wanted. They were free to be leaders. They were free to be priests, like every Celtic abbey had an abbess as well as an abbot. Okay, so we come to the point of 665, and we're in Whitby at the Whitby Synod, and Hilda of Whitby, who was the abbess of Whitby Abbey, later was canonised as a saint. There's a discussion, there's a debate going on about whether or not the nobility of Britain, I think Britain at that time, I forget how. I mean, Michael of Bernicia, he will know it. But there were various kingdoms of Britain. The Welsh kingdom, the Cumbrian, the Southern kingdom. So there were various nobilities of Britain, and England really mostly at that time. So they were having a debate at Whitby Abbey about whether or not Britain should adopt Roman Christianity, because Rome had decided to take full control of Christianity and they'd written this New Testament, and they'd included things in it like Cerinthus's evil revelations, you know, total plagiarism of the original prophecies that he attributes to St. John the Apostle. Absolute pack of lies. But, you know, they're following that as a blueprint today until humanity has the sense enough and sanity as shown by the people of Nineveh and says, no, thank you, we're not having any of that. We are actually all going to get lawful. But anyway, that's beside the point. Rome had its version of Christianity that was basically, what they'd done was they'd managed to twist Jesus into serving their original agenda. So, all right, they'd lost power of their empire because of Jesus. Now they take control of Jesus in order to establish their empirical power. And one of the ways that they established empirical power is, first of all, they have to totally crush the patriarchy of every nation that they're serving, you see. And the way you crush the patriarchy is you oppress and persecute and subjugate the matriarchy, because you can't have a patriarch without a matriarchy, you see. So they, because they are themselves an oligarchy who masquerade as a patriarchy. Today we understand they were and are an oligarchy, and fundamentally anti-human, because they live by anti-human law of might equals right to do as thy will, unlike universal law, which is right equals might to do as thy will. So the Romans had created this Christianity whereby women were all judged evil because they tempted Adam and ultimately were responsible for the death of Jesus, you see. And all of their children, only Jesus is pure because, you know, he was sired by God. Again, absolute pack of lies. Jesus says 78 times, I am the Son of Man. Okay, so let's forget what the church says. Let's look at what Jesus says. And so therefore children are all born in original sin, and they all need to equally subjugated. They are actually minor human beings. And that legal definition of a child stands to this very day. And it does bear testament to the levels of insanity that humanity have just casually accepted into our lives through each generation. That we just casually accept that our children are inferior, unimportant, insignificant human beings of little or no consequence, you see. That's why crimes against children are a minor concern. When Theresa May is imposing austerity on the people, any impacts on children are a minor concern. We need to understand these word spells, you see. So this is what was all incorporated into the Roman version of their faith in Jesus. They turned Jesus into a religion. That Jesus never was a religion. Jesus didn't come to create a new faith, did he? He came to guide his people, the Judaic people. He came to explain to us, look, I am a representation. This is a representation of a real human male. Look, I have compassion, I have care, I have kindness, I have conscience. I am a human male. I am, as the universe, our Father, and our Mother for that matter, created us, you see. So Rome is also explaining that, look, as part of our new faith called Christianity, we are going to also give men the right to deny any responsibility for the children that they have outside of wedlock. Because, yeah, men and women have always got married. Men have always sired children outside, you know, with somebody else other than the person that they're actually married to. There's always been forms of marriage, but men have nonetheless took the responsibility for the offspring that they've sired to women that they weren't formally married to. But Rome went a step further and gave those men rights to deny all parental care or provision for those children. And even they could go and rape a woman and claim that, well, actually she tempted me. You know, this is what I'm talking about, rapist law. Even to the extent that you could commit crimes, and as long as you paid some gold to the church, you would be forgiven. So you could commit any crime, and as long as you paid the church some money, you would be forgiven. So, you know, again, back to the gold worship, back to the gold cult. Jesus got covered in gold and set up as an icon. And to the extent people praying before an instrument of Roman torture, because, and they were saying to the Celtic Christians that, you know, your cross really, it's a pagan symbol, because this, our cross, our crucifix, our instrument of torture, is now a holy object, you see. And so all that was on the table for the British nobility. And yes, the males, because humans are humans, and you will get greedy humans. And though there was a lot of debate by a small majority, they chose to adopt Roman Christianity. And, you know, it's easy to understand why, isn't it? With all those women in power in Britain, owning properties and lands and what have you, and these males being told, oh, you can have all their property, you can strip them of all their rights, they'll have no rights of inheritance, they're there to do what you tell them. Well, of course, they went for it. But the rest of Britain didn't go for it, you see. And there were a heavy opposition to it, especially within the noble circles themselves, because all of those women of power in Britain, of wealth and power at those times, also had a lot of male supporters as well, who just point blank refused to adopt any of these Roman rules. And they saw it as a regression, because they saw through it. They saw, yeah, this is Rome again, trying to impose its orders on us, trying to take control of us. People knew what was going on and they stood against it. So, you know, Britain more or less carried on until William the Conqueror, 1066, when suddenly that was it, you know, the papal bull was stamped on the face of Britain very firmly, and everybody after that became subjugated to Roman Christianity. So women were stripped of their rights. St Hilda was no longer allowed to be an abbess, because women weren't allowed to teach the word of God or to represent God, because they were an inferior subhuman created to be chattel to the male. Children were stripped of all their rights, as they'd had in Celtic Christianity, which children were highly revered and considered VIPs and pure and holy. Suddenly the children are all evil and they're all born in original sin, and they all need regular beatings in order to whip the devil out of them, you see. Because people don't understand that when it says in the Bible, you see, this is the danger of people getting knowledge that they don't understand. When it says in the Bible, ruin, spare the rod and ruin the child, what is being referred to is the law. The law. Spare the law, and the children will be brought to ruin. And the law has been very sparse, hasn't it? Because, like I say, it's been whittled away until the point we're living today under total rule of Luciferian law. I mean, it's absolutely blatant. It's absolutely blatant. America saying to Venezuela, I am strong and powerful, I am bigger and stronger than you, I am going to choose who is your president, because I don't like the president your democracy has chosen. And I will still stand here and say that I uphold a democracy. I will say I'm doing this. I have chosen your president in the name of the democracy. Because, you know, they will just get away on outright lies, and it's like, you know, and basically they're in our face today saying So what are you going to do about it? They're out there waiting for the 5G rollout, which is very, very suspicious. I mean, I'm sorry, people, we need to stop that in its tracks. There's something very, very serious about that, and by the time we realise the full danger of it, it might be too late. I mean, we just cannot. These are not the days for complacency anymore. We really need to stand up for the next generation. We are responsible for their future. We really are, because we benefited of what our forebears sacrificed and worked so hard for us. What are we doing for the children? Mostly we're working for these criminal corporations governed by criminals, and actually contributing to the destruction of our planet. It's up to us now to take responsibility, and we're not going to do that until you start listening to people like Michael, until you start understanding who Jesus really, really was, and until you understand exactly what we have been subjugated to, because we're talking about a rule of consciousness that has been gaining power over every century and feeding off every generation. And when I talk about the subjugation of the female, I understand that until the female is fully restored to her full autonomy and rights of power and equality in the eyes of the law, then the patriarchy is never going to rise again, you see. The patriarchy is going to be disempowered. That's why Michael of the Bernicia isn't occupying a position of power in our country. And instead, we've got this mad, crazy woman and her mad, crazy cronies dictating to us and still robbing the people according to that same wolf pack structure as the Romans imposed centuries and centuries ago. And all the judgments still in place. All the judgments, the Babylonian judgments, all in place. Still, you're a woman, you're inferior, you're black, you're inferior, you're a Muslim, you're inferior, you're a Jew, you're inferior, you're poor, you're inferior. Oh, you've got lots of money. Basically, you've got lots of money. If you've got lots of money, you're superior. We know it's insane. We know that money does not dictate who is actually fit to lead us. Intelligence does that. There are people who are naturally intelligent, and how do we recognise true intelligence? Because truly intelligent people are always compassionate, and they understand that power always needs to be shared, and they are prepared to admit if they're wrong about something. They're prepared to listen. They're prepared to learn. They aren't arrogant dictators, you see. They take everything into account. And that's why the whole point of a democracy is for us to be able to discern, well, who is intelligent, who is informed, who is connected, who will be able to protect our rights and do the best for us as a nation, and to look out for our best interests and to defend us when necessary, and to who can we trust to uphold the law and who will stand under that law themselves and honour it, you see. But this is not the criteria that we are presently choosing our leaders, and that's why none of these leaders are lawful. They are criminals. They are tyrants, because they're still serving in a system of tyranny, and they think that they can forget and ignore everything that I'm sharing, that Michael of Bernicia is sharing, that the Chartist movement is sharing. They can ignore and forget all that and say, well, that was all in the past, we're here now. And it's like, well, I'm sorry, the only reason why you are there now is because of what happened in the past. And I'm going to give an example of it, of this Roman Christianity that ended up persecuting, and the later Protestant Christianity, you know, which is more or less one and the same thing, that went around persecuting women, murdering men and women as witches because they maybe had some supernatural abilities, or they were healing people or whatever, suddenly they were murdering them because apparently these people were dangerous. They were dangerous. Our natural shining ones in every community, the people who were there helping us, the intelligent ones, or the people who have supernatural experiences, these people are dangerous. So they've got to be tortured and persecuted and murdered in horrific ways. And to teach everybody, don't dare talk about any of the things these people are talking about. Don't ever dare start trying to heal yourselves, because you will be condemned as a witch if you start making potions for each other. You come to our church, you pay for our doctors, you see. And the dangers that these people pose, we were told that a witch, okay, could rain down fire and pestilence on us from above. They could destroy our crops. They could poison the water. They could destroy our fertility. They could withdraw our holdings from a distance. And they could control the weather. All of these things were why witches needed to be driven out of every community. And you're talking perhaps millions of people throughout Europe that this impacted and murdered. And that same consciousness that got off on those same kind of judgments, later put against black people as being inferior, so they could be slaves, that then built America and established America, to the point that we've still got this far-right extremism that elects somebody like Trump into power today. So it's still going on. That same consciousness that judged our people of our communities as a danger and a threat because of our intelligence and our intuition and our understanding, okay, they have all of the powers that they said that those people had. They have the power to rain down fire and pestilence on us from above. They have the power to poison the water. They have the power to destroy our crops. They have the power to withdraw our holdings from a distance. They have the power to destroy our fertility. And they have the power to change the weather, to control the weather. All of these things. And they have those powers precisely because they did what they did. They committed their crimes. And that's the whole point. People today are waiting for Jesus to return. Well, I am sharing the light that was given to me in 1992. 27 years I've had to live with this. And it is a weight of responsibility. It isn't an easy thing to live with. I've had to live with that, with the message. And until humanity picks up on it, you're doomed. You will die like a wolf with the wolf pack, with your savage, disgusting civilization where people are actually screaming and shouting at children for minor misdemeanours while tolerating the filth and the levels of crime and tyranny that are ruling them. Casually they will say, oh yeah, well, we know they're all corrupt. Really? Do you know that they're all corrupt? So what have you done about it? Why haven't you taken Jesus' message seriously? That the Druids, your ancestors, apparently Britain, who you want to get back to your British culture, they understood that your physical body will die. Our spirit, you will be standing in front of the universe and be giving an account of yourself. Because we aren't questioning, we aren't being like little children and asking questions, because that's what children do. That's how they learn. That's the whole point of being a child, is that we are learning, developing. And we are all. That is why, I say every man and woman in Britain is a widow. We are all widowers because we are not living by the law. Our true husband of humanity is universal law. You see. And we lost that law. Yes, Michael is exactly right. With, finally, William the Conqueror, paid for by the Pope, who then subjugated Britain to Roman Christianity, that was later replaced by Protestant Christianity, but it's the same thing. You know, they got rid of the man off the cross, but they still kept all the judgments and the subjugation against women and children. And so that is why today we have key things that we need to do. As I've said, it's all very well knowing all this stuff, but what do we do about it? And that's what I'm trying to do, is share this guidance. The first thing you do is you stand up and you demand the removal of the legal definition of minor against our children. That's the first thing you do. If you can liberate your children from that evil judgment, you have made one big first step into challenging everything that is done. Because once you have replaced that with the child as very important person, well, we can't have things like austerity, can we? And we're going to have to abandon prohibition, because we're going to need every police time and attention onto protecting our children now and addressing this rampant psychosexual disease. That is the direct result of all the crime, centuries and centuries of people living in these crazy gender constructs that have caused psychosexual disturbance and imbalance and upset in our condition of humanity, and we see it reflected in every kind of depravity that is operating in our society, precisely because we have been deprived of true intelligence and guidance of the kind that Michael of Bernicia is sharing, of the intelligence that came to me and I am sharing, because it's not my intelligence. You know, I said in my previous video to these Zionists, yes, you have all the power and I don't have any power yet. But what is my power? What is my power? You see, I do have power of myself, but what I'm sharing, the light, does not have power, because this planet is not being governed, is it, by universal law. Jah, intelligence, the higher intelligence, God, if you want to call it that, God's will is not operating on this earth. It's Luciferian will, the devil's will. Because what is a devil except a criminal? Okay? It's the devil's will. And humanity will be hosted and governed by one or the other. Which do we choose? Do we choose to be governed by Lucifer, or do we choose to be governed by God? You see? That's our choice. There's no middle ground. There's no middle ground. It's one or the other. It's either we submit to universal law, we embrace the beneficence, the unconditional love of it that it provides for us, or we decide to stick with Luciferian law, which means that we are stupid, because we're too stupid to understand the value of love, of true intelligence. We're too stupid to accept intelligence, so we are doomed to extinction. So you will have Cerinthus's evil revelations in that case, because everybody will just sit there, yeah, well, they're all mad. We know they're all mad, but you're not doing anything about it. So are you actually intelligent when you know that this is madness, but you're still following it? These are very, 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 very serious times. These are not the times anymore for sitting back and submissively accepting all of this nonsense. These are the times for getting real. And like I say, know your history. Know your history. Know it. Because if you don't know your history, you cannot understand what is going on today. You cannot understand. And you will never be able to fix the problems because you don't know the origins of them. So I'm sharing it. I'm sharing it. I've not written it in a book. I could have written books. There's enough books out there, though, isn't there? How much time do people have to read a book? How much easier is it to listen to this type of podcast? You can be doing other things while I'm talking. You don't have to devote your whole attention to staring at a screen. You can share the information. But never forget to share the source of that information that came from Universal Golden Intelligence. That created us, that wrote our DNA. and that we all submit to that. Because like I say, we are going to be ruled by one or the other. Which is it to be, humanity? What is our choice? Are we choosing universal intelligence, or are we choosing Luciferian tyrannical madness? Because that is the choice. So I know what choice a stupid species would make. I know what choice an arrogant, egotistical, narcissistic, psychopathic form of alleged human would choose. Oh yeah, they'll always go for the Luciferian, because they are oppressed. The criminals are oppressed by universal law. That's why they rail against it. That's why they fight against it. That's why they subjugated the female, so they could crush the male. The true home of universal intelligence, the true holy trinity, man, woman and child. You see? Divide them. Divide them. Convince the male that no, they have to do what you say. You own them. You own them. And the male doesn't understand that this power that seems to be granted to him, that might satisfy the desires of his dick, actually has crippled him. Because the man needs a strong woman. I'll leave you my video, Deborah and Barak, under here, that fully explains that story. You know, this understanding of how the male is crippled by when women are stripped of their rights. It actually strips men of their rights as well. That the male lived life experience is vastly inferior because the female has been stripped of her power. And in that sense, you know, I do feel I embody that, because I am very powerless in this society. I was born into a family that abused me from very early age. Both my parents abused me in different ways. I was literally a servant, a slave, from early childhood, and ultimately chucked out of the family home at the age of 14 and found myself in care. You know, so I'm a very lonely, isolated individual in this society. I've never had that foundation of support that most people take for granted, that they've got a variety of family and friends around them. And so I've never really had much credibility. So I do identify very strongly with the ancient females, you know, in terms of the levels of power that they had and the levels of credibility and respect that was shown to them. So I've never really received any sort of well, people just don't find me credible, and they don't listen to me. They very easily dismiss me. They people have completely refused really to accept what I say, or if I'm explaining something, they'll say, oh well, you know, so and so says that. And it's like, yeah, well, I don't know anything about so and so. So the fact that I'm saying it as well, doesn't that then confirm with you that what I'm saying is true and correct? But no, because so and so's, they're more important. You know, people sending me stuff from David Icke. Oh, look what David Icke says. It's like, look, I was saying everything that David Icke was saying 27 years ago. I got condemned as mad and crazy, and even had my own son turned against me for a time. So, you know, while he's appearing on Terry Wogan and selling all his books and got all the world flocking round him like it's the second coming, I'm being judged and driven into ever deepening levels of poverty and despair. But, you know, I went through it. I went through 3 years. I spent 3 years basically fasting. I gave up all colonial produce. I created as least minimum waste, as they're called. I did all that. I did it for 3 years. I went down to 6.5 stone in weight, and people were still judging me mad. I decided ultimately, well, I know that I can do it. I have done it, and I'm not going to do that now. I've got to move into this world and try and get a foothold somewhere to share this message. And so, yeah, alright, I'm still vegan, but I live according to the world. I've taken on the sins, the filth of having to live here, which does deeply depress me. You know, I hate every bit of it. I hate the waste. I just do. You know, what can I say? It just rails against me, witnessing what's going on. It's all very difficult to live with, but I've found faith and courage to do that because I've witnessed the light being experienced, and so I understand that, look, people are going to need to know this now themselves in order to be equally empowered. And hopefully you will find a way to that, to knowing that within yourself, because of people like me, because of people like Michael, who are sharing reality, who are sharing reality, who are sharing guidance. And like I say, that's the guidance. You stand up for your children's rights, you stand up for your human rights, because just in doing that, you're standing against this alleged new world order. It's an old, antiquated world order. There is nothing new about it. It, 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 it's just been given a new facade, and it has some new technology. That's the only difference. It's the same medieval nonsense, Luciferian nonsense, as it ever was, as much as is the Christian church as it is established today, in the sense it upholds the tyrannical powers of today. So, yeah, I know this has gone on a bit long, but then, sorry, we're talking about some important stuff, so huge thanks to anyone who's taken time to listen. I hope that what I've shared does add support to Michael of Bernicia's work, what he's teaching, and like I say, hats off to the man. He's done an absolutely brilliant job, and I hope that he can appreciate a little bit where I'm coming from in terms of us accepting also the reality of our universal golden light being, our eternal light being body, which I suppose it's very similar to people hundreds of years ago suddenly discovering exactly what kidneys did, you know, in our body, or what the heart actually did, or what the brain actually did. That when people started to understand the processes of what we're made of and how they work and how they operate, that the science of quantum energy has also confirmed now what we always intuitively and instinctively knew in terms of our eternal quantum energy, light being body, that we know as a soul and spirit in terms of the quantum energy thoughts in our head. I mean, I know that people find it difficult to accept, but I find it very difficult to accept that living in a world that judges children as minor human beings. I find that incredible. I find it outrageous. I find it outrageous. But quantum energy is a reality, you know. It is as real as the radiation from a man-made nuclear power plant. We need to understand that if you can accept that the radiation from a nuclear power plant is real, then you cannot fail to accept that quantum energy is every bit as real. And it is in every cell of our being and body, and it does power. The very thoughts of our minds are photons. So I'm here, I'm trying to build people up, you know, and yes, I am under heavy oppression. That's why I've had to disable dislikes and comments on my videos, because it does get very depressing, especially when you on your own. I mean, I'm a carer. I have to keep some level of sanity going here, and when I'm putting out the stuff I'm putting out, and all I'm getting is judgments and lies and libel and slander against me, then what can I do? I don't see why I should subjugate myself to that, and I don't see why other people should have to be subject to it just because they've decided to listen to one of my videos. So I'm hoping that I will get some support, that people will start to support what I'm saying and the validity of my experience. That is a message for humanity. It isn't something for me to big myself up with, and I haven't for 27 years. You know, I've never used that experience to lord it over anybody or to judge anybody. And yet, I know, like, for example, the Zionists in my previous video might feel judged, but they're not judgments, they're just facts. You know, to describe this ruling elite that are ruling us today as a force of tyranny, that's not a judgment. That's a fact. It's a fact. The law is a fact, isn't it? You know? To describe a human as inferior because they're female or because they've got dark brown skin, that's a judgment. That's a judgment. Because it isn't a fact, is it? It's not a fact that a human is inferior because she's female, or because she's a child, or because he or she has got brown skin. These aren't facts. That's what I mean. That's the difference between a fact and a judgment. So all the people who keep saying to me, oh yeah, but you're judging, aren't you? You're judging. No, I am not judging. I am explaining reality. Reality isn't a judgment. It's reality created out of the judgments against our humanity. See, I know I get overpassionate, but what can I say? I'm dealing with psychopaths, so maybe we need a bit of passion here to get this whole thing moving. Move, people. It's time to move.